All right, so for homework, I want to begin discussing some of the other practical applications of linear perspective. And one of the most important applications of linear perspective is using linear perspective for invention. That linear perspective vastly simplifies the prospect of drawing something that you can't look at, that you can't just observe and measure, and that with a deep understanding of linear perspective, you can construct basically any object that you can conceive of as, at its core, a combination of boxes and cylinders and spheres and similar sort of platonic solids. So to begin with, I want us to start constructing a room. So up to this point, the way that we've been thinking, we've been constructing an object that recedes away from us. So when I'm drawing a box, for example, I am connecting its outside corners to the point and then capping it off. We can kind of think of a room as the other way around, where we're inside of the box and extending it out. So actually, what we'll be drawing is something more like this, where the point is inside of our back wall and we're extending out from there. And this might make a little more sense if I kind of cover up the vanishing point. You can maybe imagine how this left is the left wall, and off to the right is the right wall, and the ceiling and the floor. Something I want to make sure that's understood also is that for the purposes of simplifying this, I've been putting the eye level pretty much at the center of the page. I'm putting my vanishing point also pretty much at the center of the page. But as you saw from drawing the hallways the other day, those aren't the only places that those objects can go. That just means that our head is absolutely in the center of this room. But our head might, for example, be somewhere else. So our eye level might be much lower in relation to the back wall. And in that case, and I'll try and kind of cover some of this up so maybe it's a little clearer to see, but in that case we're seeing much more of the ceiling since it's much higher above our head, and less of this floor since it's much closer to our eye level. I can also move, in addition to moving my head up and down, I can move my head left and right. So for example, in this scene, I'm going to move my vanishing point, which is there off to the left, leftwards off of center, and they're the same thing is happening. I'm seeing much more of this right wall and less of this left wall, which becomes very compressed into space. And some of these angles may look a little strange at first, but as you begin to put information in that will describe the depth that this wall is passing along, it will begin to make a little more sense. So let's go back to our, whoops, that's from the previous lecture. Let's go back to our initial little room and begin constructing some things using linear perspective. So first off, I'm going to cover up all of my work lines so far, except for my vanishing point, which I'm still going to need, just because space is going to get pretty cluttered otherwise. And as I cover this up, it becomes a little easier to see the room, so to speak. So I want to begin constructing a few objects. So let's start with something simple. Let's start with what is essentially a table in one-point perspective. So I'm going to start by drawing the front of that table as if it were a box. And then just like the boxes we've been making, I'm going to hook that up to my vanishing point and connect that out. And I can then come in and begin to define this table a little more. I could make it as complicated as I want. For me right now, I'm just going to kind of make this a simple sort of four-legged table. So it's knowing that can also use perspective to find where that fourth leg should be, which is going to give us a much greater sense of space. So, simple beginnings, but kind of impressive nonetheless. In that, if without linear perspective, you asked me to sit down and invent a room with a table in it that seemed like it made spatial sense, that might seem like a pretty tall order. And actually, I think we've got, without a ton of effort, I think we've got something not too bad. Let me just continue to sort of scribble here. All right, so yeah, not awful. Let's also make something in 2-point perspective. So I want to draw a chair. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a chair right here. So again, just like we were doing before, I'm going to start with the front corner of that box. Since I'm working in 2-point perspective, I'm going to need my horizon line back. Actually, now that I think about it, because I'm going to put my 2 points here. As we discussed, those vanishing points very well are not going to end up at the edges of your page, but for our purposes, that's just where we'll put them. It's kind of arbitrary, but it makes sense. Actually, I'm going to do this on a new layer. Hold on just a second. All right, there we go. Just so I can kind of keep this from getting too cluttered. So I'm connecting this to my vanishing points, and I can kind of imagine how in any of these parallel lines, which I'm not doing an incredible job. I should probably actually use the fact that I'm on a computer to help me draw some of these lines a little straighter. Again, you can use a ruler, but I can kind of imagine how this chair might sit in space. What parts of the back of the chair might obscure the seat, and so on and so forth. And I feel like I've got a pretty convincing sort of chair. So now I can go back in and, as before, erase some of those construction lines. So I have an object in 1-point perspective, in a room in 1-point perspective, and another object in 2-point perspective. But I want us to keep going a little bit. So I want, in addition to an object in 1-point perspective and an object in 2-point perspective, I want some kind of cylindrical object. So for me, I'm just going to put a little vase on this table. Let's actually zoom in a little bit here so we can see that a little bit better. But again, just as we discussed, I'm going to begin with a box. Oh, come on. Apparently my tablet is breaking or something. And then I can X and cross my circle, draw my ellipse. If you don't know how to do this, watch the other video from the second perspective lecture. X and cross my ellipse, draw it, and then I can, find some kind of vase shape that will maybe connect these two ellipses. But I could put any kind of cylindrical object. It could be a bottle, it could be a vase, it could be a chandelier up on the ceiling. But just in addition to my 1-2-point perspective objects, I want something that involves the construction of an ellipse, and hopefully yours will look a little cleaner than that. Yeah, I'm still kind of working with how to record this live and do it quickly. So I have a 1-point perspective object, a 2-point perspective object, and ellipse. I want 2 more things in my scene. The first thing that I want you to draw is I want you to draw a staircase, which is going to seem like a very complicated kind of object, but actually it's really nothing more than an arrangement of boxes. So I'm going to do this with relatively few steps. Said you don't have to sit here and watch me do it all day. But again, just like with our table, I'm starting with the front of our box, which in this case has a kind of stair-step approach to it instead of just being a solid square. And I'm going to do exactly like I normally would, connect all these corners to my vanishing point, and then add, oops, forgot a few. Also have to connect these inside corners, and then add on my verticals and my horizontals. So again, something that seems very, very complicated without linear perspective, but with it, whoops, erased my chair, but with it becomes pretty manageable. Again, essentially just a more complicated box, but I could do any kind of complicated thing with this. I could draw the staircase in 2-point perspective. I could place it anywhere in the room. I could put as many steps in as I want, and it would still follow all of these same laws. And I want one more thing in these drawings. I want some kind of opening into another space. So in this instance, I'm drawing a door on this back wall. And you can kind of imagine that I'm seeing the back corner of another room through there. And I would erase these lines and get the sense that I'm maybe seeing into another space. And I would probably also want to, add some width to my door frame, and these corner lines of the door frame would also follow linear perspective. But with not too much effort, far less than trying to make it all up from scratch, I've got a pretty convincing 3-dimensional space with some objects in. So for homework, I want you to make a drawing similar to this drawing, but not the same. I want your drawing to contain, at minimum, a room, which I recommend putting in 1-point perspective, highly recommend, rather than 2-point. So a room in 1-point perspective, a table, let's leave a little more up on that. A room in 1-point perspective, a rectilinear object in 1-point perspective, another rectilinear object in 2-point perspective, which for me, that was the table and the chair, something with an ellipse in it. For me, that was the vase. It could be a chandelier, anything that's sort of circular, a hole into another space, and a staircase of some sort. And in order to prove to me that you know how to invent these objects kind of on your own, your drawing has to be at least a slightly different orientation than my drawing. It can't just be this drawing again. The objects have to be in a different space around the page, or they have to be different kinds of objects. It has to be changed enough that I would believe that you invented it on your own and didn't just follow all the steps of this video verbatim, but that you actually understand the principles behind them. And this will be due next Wednesday, and I'm making it due next Wednesday so that A, you have a full week to work on it, but also so that if you are having any troubles, if you're confused at all about how your drawing is working out or not sure how to construct these objects, that we can talk about on Monday and make sure that things are back up moving smoothly. But again, for next Wednesday, invented space drawing, which I highly recommend. Actually, I'm pretty much going to require that you do it on your large sketchbook paper, your 18 by 24, so you have enough room to work. It should contain a room, an object in 1 point perspective, an object in 2 point perspective, a staircase, an ellipse, and an opening into another space. Yeah, email me if there are any questions, and otherwise I will see you in class.